Let's start with something really simple. You've probably seen purslane before. It's that low-growing plant with slightly reddish stems and thick, almost succulent-looking leaves. It doesn't grow upright like lettuce or kale. It kind of spreads quietly close to the ground. You'll find it in the most random places, along the cracks of your driveway, at the edge of your backyard, sneaking into your raised beds, or showing up right next to the plants you actually paid for. They see it and immediately label it as a weed, something that doesn't belong, something to pull, spray, or ignore. Because purslane isn't just some random plant that happens to grow everywhere. It's one of the few plants that shows up consistently in harsh, neglected, high-heat environments and still thrives. Purslane has been identified as one of the richest plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Not in some rare, exotic species, but in a plant that's literally growing at your feet. And this is where it gets a little uncomfortable, because a lot of homeowners in the U.S. will spend money on weed killers to get rid of purslane, then turn around and spend even more money on groceries, supplements, or heart-healthy products trying to get the same nutrients back. Something that grows without asking for attention, without needing perfect soil, without needing daily care, and still shows up stronger than most of the plants we try to protect. You don't have to plant it. You don't have to baby it. In many cases, it's already there, because if you're working with a backyard, a few containers, or even just a small patio space, you're always looking for plants that give you more than they take. And purslane is exactly that kind of plant. Now here's the part most people don't stop to think about. Purslane isn't just interesting because it exists, it's interesting because of when we're rediscovering it. Honestly, this is happening at a time when a lot of people in the U.S. are feeling the same pressure. Groceries are getting more expensive, eating healthy feels like it costs more every year, and on top of that, people are spending even more on supplements, powders, oils, and anything labeled anti-inflammatory or heart-healthy. And here's the thing. Most of those solutions are built around one idea. You keep buying them every month again and again, but purslane doesn't work like that. Because while all of that is getting more expensive, this plant is quietly growing for free. And it doesn't stop there. A lot of the plants, people try to grow lettuce, spinach, even some herbs they struggle in real American summers. If you've ever gardened in places like Texas, Arizona, California, or even parts of Florida, you already know this. The heat hits, the soil dries out, and suddenly the plants you were excited about just stop. Some bolt, some wilt, some never really get going. But this is where purslane flips the script. Instead of struggling in heat, it actually thrives in it. Instead of needing constant watering, it keeps going with very little. Instead of demanding perfect soil, it shows up in the worst spots and still grows. And honestly, that should change how you think about value, because value isn't just about what's popular or expensive. It's about what actually works in real conditions. Now, let's talk about money for a second, because this part hits hard. You could easily spend $50, $80, even $100 a month on supplements, specialty foods, or health products trying to improve your diet. But for that same $100, you could walk into Home Depot, Lowe's, or a local garden center, pick up a few containers, some soil, maybe a few starter plants, and start building a small system that actually produces food not just once, but over and over again. Purslane doesn't even need that level of investment. In many cases, it's already growing in your backyard, your patio edge, or the corner of your raised bed. No setup, no subscription, no supply chain, just there, waiting for you to either pull it out or recognize what it is. Now here's where it really starts to shift. Up to this point, you could still say, okay, that's a tough plant, it grows easily, that's useful. But this is where it goes from useful to honestly kind of shocking. Because most people assume something very simple. If a plant looks like a weed, it probably doesn't have much nutritional value. And that assumption feels logical. But purslane completely breaks that. Research has shown that purslane is one of the richest vegetable sources of omega-3 fatty acids, along with a range of antioxidants and essential micronutrients. And here's the thing, omega-3 is usually something people associate with fish oil supplements, or expensive heart health products, not something growing next to your driveway. And this is where it gets interesting because now you have a contradiction. On one side, you have premium products carefully packaged, marketed, and sold at a higher price. On the other, you have a low-growing plant most people ignore or remove. Same category of benefit, completely different perception. And honestly, that says a lot about how we decide what's valuable. Because most people don't judge based on what something actually does. They judge based on where it comes from, how it looks, and whether they had to pay for it. But Purslane doesn't play that game. It doesn't look impressive. It doesn't come in a bottle. It doesn't have branding. And yet it still shows up in conversations about anti-inflammatory foods, heart health, and nutrient density. Now here's another layer. Most people don't think about foods that survive across generations, across completely different cultures. Usually aren't random, they stick around because they work. And Purslane shows up in Mediterranean cooking, Indian dishes, Mexican cuisine, and Chinese food traditions. Different climates, different cultures, same plant. That's not a coincidence, that's a pattern. And what's happening now is that modern science is starting to catch up to that pattern. Not inventing it, just explaining it. That should make you pause for a second, because it means something very simple. Some of the things people are spending money trying to add into their diet may have been quietly available all along. Not in a store, not in a supplement aisle, but in something they've been stepping over or pulling out of the ground. And this is where the story starts to connect, because once you understand the nutrition, once you see the pattern across cultures, you start to realize this isn't just a random plant. It's something people used on purpose. Which raises a bigger question. If Purslane is this nutritious and this widespread, why did we stop treating it like food in the first place? Purslane didn't start out as something people sprayed or pulled out of the ground without thinking. For a long time, across multiple parts of the world, this was simply food. Not trendy, not rare, not superfood, just something people ate regularly because it was there, it was useful, and it worked. And that's what makes this so interesting. Because somewhere along the way, especially in places like the United States, the definition of what counts as food started to shift. It became less about what grows well and more about what looks intentional. So what's packaged, what's sold in stores, and what fits into a clean, controlled system. Backyard spaces became lawns. Lawns became something to maintain, control, and perfect. And anything that didn't fit that image got labeled as a problem. So plants like Purslane didn't lose their value, they lost their context, they went from being part of a food system to being something that shows up where it's not supposed to. And once that label sticks weed, it's hard to see anything else. Other cultures never fully made that shift. In many parts of the world, Purslane is still eaten today. Not as a novelty, not as a rediscovered trend, but as something completely normal. It shows up in everyday meals, in simple dishes, in ways that don't require explanation or marketing. And that's usually a sign of something important. Because foods that survive across generations without needing to be constantly reintroduced or rebranded tend to be there for a reason. And now, what's happening is that modern science is starting to circle back and explain what those systems already practiced. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, validating way. Looking at nutrient density, resilience, and long-term dietary patterns, and finding that many of these overlooked plants were doing more than people realized. So when you look at Purslane today, it's not just a plant growing in the wrong place, it's more like a piece of knowledge that got disconnected from how people live now. And once you start to see it that way, the question changes. It's no longer, why is this weed in my yard? It becomes, what else have I been taught to ignore that might actually be useful? And this is where it all comes together, because if everything we talked about so far was just about nutrition or history, that would already be interesting. But what scientists found more recently takes this to a completely different level. Because Purslane isn't just a plant that happens to be edible, it's a plant that behaves differently from most others. researchers discovered that purslane uses a rare combination of photosynthetic strategies that allow it to grow efficiently, while also conserving water in ways most crops can't. And honestly, you don't need to understand all the biology to see why that matters. It means this plant can handle heat, drought, and rough conditions while still growing fast enough to be useful. And if you've ever tried to grow food in a real backyard, not a perfect lab environment, but an actual yard with inconsistent soil, strong sun, and limited water, you already know how big that is. 'Cause most plants force you into a trade-off. Either they grow fast but need a lot of water, or they survive harsh conditions but barely grow at all. Purslane doesn't follow that rule. It sits right in the middle, doing both well enough to stand out. And this is where it gets interesting, because while researchers are spending years and honestly billions of dollars trying to develop crops that can survive a hot or drier future, a plant with many of those traits is already here. Not engineered, not patented, not packaged, just growing. And this is the part that should make you pause. Because if a plant like this exists edible, resilient, nutrient-dense, and widely available, then the real limitation isn't access, it's awareness. It's whether you recognize it or ignore it. Because now this isn't just about purslane anymore. It's about how we've been trained to see value. We've been taught, slowly over time, to trust what we buy more than what we grow, to value what's packaged more than what's natural, to assume that if something is free, it must not be important. But plants like purslane quietly challenge that idea. They grow without permission. They survive without support. And they offer something real without asking you to pay for it. So when you look at your backyard, your raised beds, or even the cracks in your driveway, you're not just looking at random growth anymore. You're looking at potential, at options, at small, overlooked pieces of a system that could actually support you if you understood them differently. And no, this doesn't mean you stop growing what you like. It doesn't mean you turn your yard into something unrecognizable, but it does mean you start asking better questions. Before you pull something out, before you spray it, before you decide it doesn't belong. You pause for a second. Because sometimes the smartest move isn't adding something new. It's recognizing what's already there. You don't need another expensive supplement, another trendy health product, or a perfectly clean, weed-free yard to move toward better health. Like sometimes the better answer is already growing right in front of you, and honestly, purslane might be one of the clearest examples of that. It's tough, it's useful, it's edible, and in many parts of the U.S., it's already showing up without you having to plant anything at all. So the next time you see it, don't just pull it out automatically. Take a closer look. Comment below. Have you ever noticed purslane in your yard before, and would you consider keeping it? And if you want more videos like this simple, practical ways to rethink what you grow and what you eat, hit subscribe.